Yeah, I can remember a lot of back in those days. It was very, very common was women, getting beat up. I mean, it was just husbands get drunk and blame them on them. You see women walking around with black eyes and teeth broken out and stuff like that. And you're raised in that environment, and it has a major impact on you. And you have to make the decision on a day-to-day basis. You're not allowed to sit and wonder whether or not what you did is correct or incorrect. You just make it and go on. So that helped him in that sense. And then the fact that the way my education came about, where I was basically illiterate and then started to college, and the effort I had to put into that, comparatively speaking, with other students, it taught me quite a bit. It developed a lot of discipline and study habits and work habits that I don't think my kid has today or many other people have, because I basically learned how to read and write in college. And it's hard enough to pass college, but learning how to read while you're doing it's a little more difficult.
Right. When you would come into a room with Governor Blanchard, Attorney General Kelly, to discuss a policy proposal, what is it that Gary Owen brings to that table?
I thought I always brought my caucus's position to that. I had a real good sense of where the caucus was at, where they would go, what they would do, and what they wouldn't do. That was my strength. I always had.
That was true even though you had come in a divided vote, but the caucus came behind you, and you were confident.
I think so. I think I knew the caucus as well as any person, and I think that's the reason I beat Joe, in the sense that I had a very, very good understanding of the caucus, where they were coming from, what their concerns were, what their personal ambitions were individually. I interacted well. I had good, what you call people skills. I'm a very sociable person. So I knew everyone in the caucus. And I got along especially well with the African Americans at that time. And my roommate was Morris Hood, who was black, and Paul Rosenbaum was Jewish. We had a strange combination. But not that meant much, but it just demonstrated ability to interact with all the different facets of the caucus. And so therefore, when I walked in the meeting, and I think they recognized that I had strong support behind me, and that I knew what I was talking about when I would say we can do this and we can do that. That was my strength in those meetings. And I had, the fact is you get that by producing. Right. And the fact that we produced the tax vote, and we produced several other votes, budgets, and done in a timely manner, and done effectively, and balanced in most instances, and where we controlled the special interest groups in the budget process, and many times the special interest, where it became probably for the first time that people began to recognize that the UAW didn't necessarily call all the shots for the Democrats. They obviously had a great deal of influence on the labor issues, and they continue to have a great, almost all the Democrats supported them almost unanimously on the labor issues, but they were sort of stopped there, where before they had input into every issue. And used to say, you couldn't pass anything until Sam Fishman saw it. Back when he was head of the UAW CAP, there was always that rumor, whether it was dog tracks or any other issue. I think when I became speaker, the MEA and other interest groups became more involved in the process, and it felt more comfortable with the Democrats. And so we made strong inroads into that profession to getting support, which had basically been divided because of parochial. The MEA was supporting, I assume, almost all Republicans at that time, because most of them opposed parochial. Times flip around, but back in those days, that was the case. When I was speaker, we had 32 members who were pro-choice and 32 who were right to life. 50-50, right down the middle, and that was on the Medicaid funding abortion issue. And so it was a difficult caucus, and the caucuses have changed over the years. I don't know what it is today, but I would bet you probably don't have any more than 10 right-to-lifers in the entire Democrat caucus.
So there was a commitment, though, that, beyond the issue commitment. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to get, when you got 32, to get agreement on an issue like that. But there was an understanding of a common goal in terms of the caucus.
I think the process, we had lots of caucuses in those days.
Caucus meetings.
People come in, and expressed where they were coming from, and I felt that where we were dealing with the issues in Detroit equity package, many of the tough votes that people in the suburban Wayne County and Macomb County had, we'd have those caucuses, we'd listen to people's concerns, and then we would go from there. It never bothered me to have a caucus, to go and sit and listen and argue my point. And most of the time, the caucuses were very, very productive. And so that's just the way that process worked. I can't tell you what I'm hearing. It doesn't work that effective now with term limits. In fact, I know for a fact it doesn't work that way. It was a far better process in getting things done without term limits than what it is today with term limits.
Because
of institutional memory, better legislators. Not better in the sense they're better people, just better educated to the process and understand how the process works, and appreciation of the process. When you can go in, and my opponent argued, I'd been there 10 years, been on the most important committee there, had been involved in it from day one, and he could argue he had a lot more experience, and I hadn't had enough experience to be speaker. I ought to wait a few years and take your spot later down the road. Well, now a guy comes in 2 years and Speaker of the House.
Yes.
That couldn't happen under the old system. I mean, the fact that Bobby Krim got in there right away is only because he'd been there before '64, and he worked in that process for many years as Bill Ryan's administrative assistant. And even him, I think most people recognize Bobby was one of the more knowledgeable people in Lansing at that time because of his staff position. But if he just came cold off the streets, he'd have never been Speaker in 2 years.
You were able, you talked before about the growth in political funds that the caucus was able to raise. That suggests to me that you must have got on the good side of some of those groups that were not very happy with you at the outset.
We saw the trend coming, and talking to Willie Brown in California. I ran into him.
Mayor of San Francisco.
Yeah, at this time he was Speaker of the House in California.
House.
And he was saying, you know, these races are becoming, and California is generally the first state to experience a lot of things, and this was one of them. And he warned me, he says, I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, you're going to have to raise a lot of money, because what's happening, these caucus funds are into the competitive seats out here and becoming more and more expensive each time. And so we kind of got to jump on the Republicans in that first election, and I think it helped us after the tax vote in getting those seats back. We recognized that problem, and when I went to the MEA and told them they had to raise more money because we basically had raised the taxes to maintain the level of support in the public schools, and they had an obligation to participate to a higher level than what they historically had. They were going to soon be facing people that weren't going to provide the resources for them to get the job done in the public schools. And so there was arguments we could make, but then the Republicans got right on it as well. And at the end, it's about like any other battle. It ends up being even. So, you know.
All right. But so the UAW became once again a major supporter.
No, I think less of a factor, Lynn. Is, you know, up until that point, I think they had been the major funding group for the House Democrats. So as the caucus funds grew in proportion, I think the interest groups like the MEA and the UAW individually, their effectiveness was reduced.
And so other groups as well were then brought in.
Because once you broaden this big pile of money that's controlled by the House leadership, they then can distribute it to the competitive seats, where historically you had to go to UAW, the MEA individually as a legislator and get that money. Now all of a sudden you could go in and in a very competitive race get $15,000 out of the House caucus fund, where from the UAW you might only be able to get $2,000 or $3,000.
That gives you greater, a stronger role, greater power in the caucus itself, does it not?
I think it does, but it's only in a few seats that you end up spending the money, as you know.
Those contested.
There's only about, maybe out of all the seats, maybe 10 or 12 that you're really into. Right. And to show you how ineffective it was, John Maynard and Richard Fitzpatrick, I raised, I think, around 15.
Now John was Macomb County, and Richard
Battle Creek. But after I raised them each about $15,000 apiece and took the money to them during their campaign, and then they both teamed up with Republicans to get rid of me the next time. So if you ever want to see that the money doesn't work in the process, that would have been one of the examples.